Hello, my name is Stephen Lange-Pearson, and this is my presentation on the book Code Talker, a novel by Joseph Bruchac. Some background knowledge. Historical fiction, that's what this book is. It is about a fictional character named Ned whose experiences are based in reality, but the character himself did not exist. You will never find a Ned be gay on any dog tags. The Code Talkers were Native American service members who sent encrypted messages. They are from different tribes, but the main ones were Navajo because their language was especially hard to crack for the Japanese soldiers due to them not having a written formula for how to crack the language. There's no dictionary or anything like that. In World War II, they were crucial to the war effort. There was a lot of officers who were white and Navajo alike who would testify that they were essential to winning battles in the Pacific Theater, especially in Iwo Jima. As a quick summary of what happened, Ned Begay was a Navajo boy who was sent to boarding school at an early age. He was forced to reject all of his Navajo traditions. He was forced to cut his hair. He was forced to, get rid of all of his garments that were culturally significant to him. And as Americans entered World War II, he was suddenly approached by the government asking if him and the rest of the Navajo boys would want to become code talkers. And I found this absolutely ridiculous, and we'll get to that. But at 16 years old, he was able to lie about his age and get into the code talkers after his mother and father told him to wait at least 1 year before they would sign off on his papers. He deals with a lot of battle fatigue, getting shot in the shoulder, having to deal with some PTSD at some point, sort of like that. Not really PTSD, I guess, because that's post-traumatic. But he had to deal with traumatic experiences for sure. His spirit and culture, though, keeps him going. He calls this the Navajo way. That's how they kind of refer to it. And this involves keeping a positive attitude, keeping your spirit intact and knowing that you can endure anything and keep pushing through to fight for your freedom and fight for what is right in the Navajo way. Now, he shares his full story with his grandchildren, which is why in the book he often refers to the people as his grandchildren. He, at the end of the book, tries to buy a house outside of the reservation property with the GI Bill, but is run-ins into a lot of problems. He thinks about becoming a teacher, but doesn't go through with it, as far as I remember. Now, let's keep going. Why do I recommend Code Talker? Code Talker, it is a historically accurate depiction, according to many people, of a marginalized group in World War II. Now, the Code Talkers were not really talked about for a very long time due to their, how do I put this? They weren't talked about because the entire operation was kept secret until the 90s or the early 2000s, kind of when they started to publicize stuff. This is an inspiring tale of loyalty and to one's culture, and in the face of oppression, people like Ned, who were code talkers, were able to suck it up and say, you know what, we are going to endure this hardship that the government is putting on us because we want to, secretly, worship in our spirituality, and, we want to we're very passionate about our roots as Navajo people. And all of a sudden the government comes along and says, hey, do you want to become code talkers and have your language actually become a secret weapon that will help keep your homeland safe? And they say sure. So they value language and identity in this book, and they depict the Navajo way, which again is based in positivity and having hope for the future. That's what keeps Ned going quite a long time, and that's why he and a lot of other Navajo boys had a much easier time in the military than a lot of the other guys did in terms of training and stuff like that, because of the Navajo way, which kept them going. Ned's social identity interactions. He was a Navajo boy. He faced a lot of inhumane treatment in prejudice and in discrimination in these boarding schools. He was stripped of anything culturally significant. He was forced to adapt. If he was punished, there would be awful consequences that we'll get to. And a lot of his friends that he met were also stripped of everything, all their dignity and everything else. Now, he also experienced had a lot of traumatic experiences as a Navajo teen and a soldier. In an all-Navajo platoon, he was treated with a lot of respect, but he also ran into, obviously, the horrors of war, and, he had to watch people, die. He saw a lot of awful things. I think the book purposely kept this book very less graphic than it could have been, I'd imagine, because I think I noticed that it was published by Penguin something, and I have a feeling that the book could have been a lot more gruesome in terms of the depictions of war, but this one was very tame, and I think part of it is due to the not the nature of the novel, but I believe also it was because he was kind of behind the lines for a lot of the time decoding messages. Now, his language and culture is crucial to the war, which is a big part of, like being a Navajo soldier meant that a lot of the time if you are a code talker, your language that you have been punished for over the years has suddenly become the secret weapon, as I said earlier. And I think that was absolutely fascinating how they were able to suck it up and say, you know what, we're just going to do this because we're fighting for something bigger than us. He was part of the marginalized and lower class. He experiences a lot of discrimination in this factor because his parents are lower class, meaning that he has to send home his money to them that he makes as a Marine on salary. And it is the honorable thing to do to take care of your elderly in the Navajo culture. And his sister as well is trying to struggle through boarding school and sends him letters talking about how it is back home. And he really wants to make right for his family and do the right thing. And by providing for his family, he can break through that lower class barrier. And he gets a GI Bill, which he tries to use to buy a house later on, but that doesn't ever come to fruition. Individuals with similar intersections. Kinsale Drake is a young Navajo award-winning poet. She runs a nonprofit organization for tribal libraries. Now, she actually is able to do a lot of work for the Navajo tribes because she has a certain way about her on social media where she has a lot of attention. She's won multiple awards for poetry, and she actually does a thing where she brings a lot of literature and to stock tribal libraries, which allows them to preserve the culture and keep it going. I thought this was very interesting, and her intersections are very similar to how Ned's were, except that Ned was in a boarding school. She really didn't grow up in boarding schools, but she nonetheless wants to preserve her culture. So that was the major social media fixture that I found. Chester Nez was actually had a very similar life to Ned. He had experiences of abuse in the boarding schools. He was one of the last surviving code talkers from the war, and he had a quote that I found was really interesting. He says, "People ask me, why did you go? Look at all the mistreatment that could have been done to your people. Someone's got to go. Someone's got to defend this country. Someone's got to defend the freedom. That's the reason why I went." And I found this very moving because he was saying that no matter what happens, I am doing this for something bigger than me. I don't care that the United States treated me like this because someone's got to defend our freedom. Someone's got to defend our country. And he didn't say this, but he had to defend his homeland as well. Even though the United States ran the reservations, he was still fighting for what was right and what was the Navajo way and what was his culture and his people and his language. And he realized that he was fighting for something a lot bigger than him. So again, he sucked it up and said, you know what, this is unjust, this is horrible, but I am going to do this. I'm going to do this anyway. My research article talked about Navajo children who couldn't speak the language at school. They were forced to have their mouths washed out with soap. They would be shut in closets and beaten if they were to ever speak on their language. And I found this, obviously horrible for a multitude of reasons, but the main one being that they were then forced to, march hundreds of miles when they were, older and had to endure the, the teens and adults at the time of those children in the boarding schools. They would have had to experience, when they were children, the long walk, which was when they were forced to march hundreds of miles to reservations, which were basically internment camps. And then all of a sudden the government came along and said, hey guys, could you possibly forgive us for everything that we've done just so that you can use your language as a weapon of war? And a lot of the people saw this differently than I did, because obviously at first I was very against the idea of this historical fiction, because I was thinking there's no way that anybody really thought that they could just forgive the government and just do this. But after seeing the quote, I kind of understand where they were coming from, where they were just sucking it up and being honorable and realizing this is the Navajo way. We have to do this for our country. Now, after the Code Talker program, many were still disrespected until their role was publicized. What I mean by this is that in the late 90s, early 2000s, they were actually only then acknowledged by the public as code talkers, and that's why there's not a lot of code talker literature coming from the actual men who served, because a lot of them had passed by then or were too old to want to write anything about it. Many white officers actually believed the Battle of Iwo Jima would have been possible without code talkers, and I thought that was incredible because, after all of this work that the government has put in to ruining the lives of all of these Navajo men, all of a sudden they are just these crucial fixtures in the military. And even after that, they were disrespected for decades. Ned has a scene where he is in this room, in this bar, and he's trying to get a drink, a Coke, and they literally refuse him and kick him out because he's just there and he's Navajo. It's absolutely ridiculous. But again, I am not the author. I'm not one of the people who served. I don't understand fully the concept of being so loyal to your culture. And I found it very admirable that they do that. And I had to kind of check my privilege and realize that while I have maybe would have some bitterness, they realized that it was something bigger than them they had to do. So overall, this relates to the book Code Talker, because the Navajo children related to Ned when he was 6, and the Navajo teens related to him when he was 16, which was when he went off to war. I found this book very moving, and I recommend anybody to read it. Now, I will talk later. Have a great rest of your day.